The quiet beginning. The sound of applause filled the hall as the lights dimmed. It was another evening of celebration, but to Keanu it felt strangely calm. He stood backstage, his hands loosely folded, listening to the laughter and excitement outside. He had faced countless cameras before, but this time something felt different. He wasn't just an actor tonight. He was a man preparing to speak about something deeply personal. When the host called his name, he stepped onto the stage with quiet confidence. The crowd rose to their feet, cheering, clapping, calling his name. But his eyes searched for one person, Sandra. She sat near the front, smiling softly. Her eyes filled with that same warmth he remembered from decades ago. It wasn't the kind of smile that demanded attention. It was the kind that steadied the heart. Keanu paused for a moment before he began speaking. His voice was gentle, steady, filled with emotion that wasn't rehearsed. He started not with his success, not with his movies, but with gratitude. He spoke about kindness, about people who lift others without expecting anything in return. And then, quietly, he said her name. "Sandra taught me what grace looks like," he said. "Not the kind that people see on camera, but the kind that happens when no one is watching." The hall fell silent. Sandra blinked, trying to hide the tears that formed too quickly. She wasn't expecting him to say that. Keanu's words came from a place she knew well, the quiet space between pain and healing. As the cameras flashed, Keanu shared stories the world had never heard. Moments of laughter during long filming nights. Times when he had lost faith in himself, and she reminded him why it was worth continuing. He described how she carried light even in her darkest days, and how that light reached him too, when he didn't even realize he needed it. Sandra smiled, but there was a tremble in her lips. Every word pulled her back through years of shared memories. The first script reading, the coffee breaks between takes, the quiet car rides when the city was asleep. He wasn't just talking about her as a co-star. He was talking about her as a human being who had touched his life in ways few ever could. After the event, when the lights faded and the crowd began to leave, Sandra walked slowly backstage. Keanu was standing alone near the curtains, looking thoughtful, as if the applause had never happened. She walked up behind him and said softly, "You didn't have to say all that." He turned, smiling faintly. "I didn't have to," he replied, "but I wanted to." They stood in silence for a moment, the world outside forgotten. There was a comfort between them that didn't need words. It was built over years, through distance, laughter, and quiet care. Finally, Sandra broke the silence. "You know," she said with a half-smile, "people will start thinking there's something more between us." Keanu looked at her with that familiar gentleness that always seemed to carry an unspoken truth. "Maybe there always was," he said quietly. The words lingered in the air, soft but heavy. Sandra looked away for a moment, her breath catching slightly. She wasn't sure what to say. After all these years, after everything life had given and taken from them, maybe that was the first honest thing they had both allowed themselves to admit. But before she could respond, someone called her name from across the hall. She smiled faintly, whispering, "We'll talk later." As she walked away, Keanu watched her go, the same calm grace in every step, the same quiet strength that had always drawn him in. He didn't know what would come next, but for the first time in years, he felt something stir inside him, a feeling he thought had long faded. Later that night, when Sandra returned home, she found a message waiting on her phone. It was from Keanu. "You once said people don't talk about what they truly love, they show it. Maybe tomorrow we should finally talk." She read the message twice, her heart pounding softly. Outside, the rain had started falling, tapping gently against the glass. And for the first time in a long while, she felt something unfamiliar. Anticipation. She didn't reply immediately. She placed the phone down, walked to the window, and smiled faintly at her reflection. She knew tomorrow might change everything. But as she turned off the lights and lay in bed, a thought whispered through her mind. What if it was already too late to say what should have been said years ago? The story was no longer about movies, fame, or old memories. It was about two souls who had learned too late that silence sometimes says everything, and that love, no matter how quietly it begins, always finds a way to return. The echo of unspoken words the next morning came quietly. Soft sunlight filtered through the curtains of Sandra's room, warming the edges of the sheets and touching her face. She opened her eyes slowly, half unsure if last night had really happened. The applause, his voice, the message. She reached for her phone, hoping it was just a dream, but the message was still there. You once said people don't talk about what they truly love, they show it. Maybe tomorrow we should finally talk. She read it again and again. Those words carried something deep, something she hadn't felt in years. She placed the phone on the nightstand and stared at the ceiling. For years, Sandra had learned to keep her emotions measured. She had built her life on composure, on smiling when her heart was tired, on moving forward when everything inside her wanted to stay still. But something in Keanu's voice last night had cracked the calm she had so carefully built. She got up, made coffee, and tried to focus on her schedule. Interviews, meetings, rehearsals, the same rhythm she knew by heart. But her mind kept drifting, back to him, to the way he looked at her when he said her name, to the softness in his eyes when the room went silent. Later that afternoon, she finally typed a reply. Coffee sounds good. Same place? She hesitated before pressing send. That small hesitation held years of fear, the fear of what might happen if two people who had always danced around their feelings finally stopped pretending. Across the city, Keanu was already awake. He had barely slept. His mind replayed her expression when he spoke last night. He hadn't planned to say her name. It had just come out, naturally, like breathing. He had spoken from a place he usually kept hidden, the place that still remembered her laugh, her kindness, her quiet strength. When her message came, he smiled. Same place, she remembered. It was a small cafe by the lake, tucked away from the noise of Hollywood. They had gone there once, years ago, after a long day of filming. It was the kind of place where people didn't take pictures or ask questions. Just quiet conversation and the smell of roasted coffee. He arrived early. The cafe was nearly empty, the air calm, the sound of soft jazz playing in the background. He took a seat by the window where the sunlight fell gently on the wooden table. He ordered 2 coffees, one black, one with cream. She always liked hers that way. When Sandra walked in, the room seemed to soften. She wore a simple white shirt, her hair loosely tied, her eyes calm but searching. When their eyes met, she smiled. You still remember how I take my coffee? She said softly, sitting down. Some things stay, Keanu replied with a faint grin. For a few minutes, they didn't say much. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It felt familiar, like the pause between 2 pieces of music that had always belonged together. Finally, Sandra spoke. That speech last night, you meant every word, didn't you? He nodded slowly. Every single one. She looked out the window. You know what's strange? I didn't realize how much I needed to hear them. Maybe we both needed it, he said quietly. I think we've both been holding on to things we never said. She looked at him then, her eyes soft but filled with something deeper. You had your own life, your own pain. I didn't want to step into that. You were never stepping into it, he said gently. You were part of the reason I made it through. The words caught her off guard. She looked down, tracing her finger along the edge of her cup. Keanu, she said finally, Do you ever think about how different things might have been if we'd said what we felt back then? He smiled faintly. All the time. For a long moment, they said nothing. The sound of the lake outside filled the silence. Then quietly, he said, "You once told me love isn't always about being together. Sometimes it's just knowing that someone understands you." She nodded. "I remember saying that. I think I said it to protect myself." "And did it work?" he asked. She smiled sadly. "Not really." He leaned forward slightly, his voice soft. "You don't have to protect yourself with me." There it was, the line that shook the calm. She looked at him, unsure if he meant it as comfort or confession. Maybe both. Her chest felt tight, her thoughts tangled. She wanted to say something real, something honest, but words always came late when it came to him. "I don't know if I can do that again," she whispered. "Let someone in." "You already have," he said simply. The truth in his voice made her heart tremble. She looked away, blinking fast. For the rest of the afternoon, they talked. Not about fame, not about their careers, but about life, about quiet mornings, loneliness, hope, and healing. The kind of conversations that feel like home. As they left the cafe, a soft rain began to fall. They stood outside under the awning, neither wanting to say goodbye. "It's strange," Sandra said, watching the raindrops slide down the window. "I thought I was done with surprises." "Maybe life saves the best ones for when you least expect them," he said. She smiled faintly, her eyes lifting to his. For a second, it felt like the world had slowed. The air between them carried something unspoken, the quiet possibility of a love that had waited too long but hadn't faded. Then a flash of lightning lit the sky, followed by distant thunder. They both laughed, breaking the tension. "You should go before the rain gets worse," she said softly. "What if I stay?" he asked with a teasing grin. "Then I'll make you carry the umbrella," she replied, smiling. They walked together to her car, sharing the umbrella, their shoulders brushing. When they reached the car, he paused. "Sandra," he said gently, "thank you for coming." "Thank you for asking," she replied. She got into the car, started the engine but didn't drive off immediately. Through the rain-blurred glass, she watched him standing there, still, calm, watching her go. That night, Sandra couldn't sleep. She sat by the window, the rain still falling, her heart full of something she hadn't felt in years. Hope mixed with fear. She replayed his words in her mind. "You already have." What did he mean? Did he still care for her that way? Or was it simply his way of saying that they shared a connection that would always exist, but never move beyond friendship? She didn't know. All she knew was that something had shifted. Something deep and fragile had been stirred back to life. And somewhere across the city, Keanu sat in his apartment, his guitar resting beside him. He strummed a few soft notes, each one carrying memories, of laughter, silence, and the way her eyes had looked when she said his name. He closed his eyes and whispered softly, "Maybe this time, we'll get it right." Outside, the rain began to fade. The city lights reflected softly on the wet streets, and the night grew still. Both of them, in their separate homes, were thinking the same thing. Was this the beginning of something new, or the echo of something they had lost too long ago? The next morning would bring an answer neither of them expected. The distance between hearts, the next morning arrived wrapped in light fog. The city felt slower, quieter, as if holding its breath for something unseen. Sandra woke up early, earlier than usual, her thoughts already restless. The memory of yesterday lingered like a dream she didn't want to end. Every detail, his smile, his words, even the sound of the rain, had carved its place in her heart. She poured herself a cup of coffee and sat near the window, watching the faint sunlight shimmer on the wet streets. For the first time in a long while, She felt a kind of peace she couldn't explain. It wasn't excitement or joy. It was softer than that, a calm she hadn't known she missed. But peace never stays long when emotions begin to wake. By mid-morning, her phone started buzzing with notifications. News outlets had picked up clips from Keanu's speech. Headlines flooded the internet. Keanu's heartfelt tribute to Sandra, old friendship or hidden love. Fans speculate emotional confession. She stared at the screen, her stomach tightening. She had forgotten that even quiet moments could turn loud when the world was watching. Her assistant called soon after. "You're trending again," the voice said, half laughing, half nervous. "They're saying last night looked like a love confession," Sandra sighed, rubbing her forehead. "Of course they are." "Do you want to issue a statement?" She paused. "No, not yet." She hung up and sat in silence. Part of her wanted to laugh at how easily the world built stories out of feelings they didn't understand. But another part of her, a quieter, more fragile part, worried about what this might mean for him. On the other side of the city, Keanu had already seen the headlines too. His team had called early, voices filled with concern. "People are speculating again," his agent said. "We might want to clear things up before it gets out of hand." Keanu was silent for a long time. "No," he said finally. "Not yet." "Are you sure? You know how the press gets." "I know," he said softly. "But sometimes silence says more than a statement." After hanging up, he looked at the small framed photo on his shelf. A picture from the early days, the two of them laughing during a break on set, both young, both fearless. He smiled faintly. The world could make stories out of anything, but only they knew the truth behind their moments. Still, he couldn't ignore the thought that maybe this time, silence could be misunderstood. By afternoon, Sandra received another call, this time from a talk show producer. They wanted her to come on for a live interview to clear the air. At first, she declined, but the producer gently added, "We've already spoken to Keanu. He's agreed to appear. It might help if you both do it together." Her heart skipped. She hadn't heard from him since the coffee. Had he really agreed? Or was it just a setup to pull headlines from their connection? She hesitated, then finally said, "I'll think about it." Later that evening, she sat alone on her couch, watching the flicker of candlelight dance across the room. She thought about the cafe, about how natural it felt to sit across from him again. She wondered if he was thinking the same thing. Her phone buzzed. It was him. "They want us to do a joint interview." I said yes. "Only if you feel okay about it." She smiled faintly at his honesty. She typed back, "I'm okay with it, as long as we do it our way." The reply came quickly. "Our way is the only way." 2 days later, they met at the studio. The set was quiet before the cameras started rolling. Soft lights, a calm background, and a host who looked both excited and careful, knowing the weight of what was about to unfold. When the cameras turned on, Sandra and Keanu sat side by side. Their body language said more than any script could. There was ease, familiarity, and something unspoken that neither tried to hide. The host smiled. "People have been talking about that beautiful moment at the event. Keanu, you said Sandra taught you what grace looks like. What did you mean by that?" Keanu looked at Sandra before answering. "I meant that she carries kindness even when the world doesn't deserve it. That's rare." Sandra smiled gently, the corners of her eyes softening. "That's very sweet," she said. The host turned to her. "And Sandra, how did it feel hearing him say that?" She took a breath. "It reminded me that sometimes the people who know us best aren't the ones who talk the most. They're the ones who listen." The room fell silent for a moment. Their words weren't rehearsed, and that's what made them powerful. But as the interview continued, the host's tone shifted. "So, just to clarify," he said carefully, Should fans take this as friendship or something more? Keanu's smile faded slightly. He glanced at Sandra, letting her lead. She looked down, her fingers tightening slightly around her cup. She wasn't ready for this question. "We've always had a deep respect for each other," she said softly. "And maybe that's what people see. Respect looks a lot like love when it's real." The host nodded politely, but his expression hinted at curiosity. "So you're saying it's love, but not the romantic kind?" Sandra froze for half a second, and that pause, that tiny hesitation, was enough for the cameras to capture something more. Keanu quickly added, "What matters isn't the label. It's the truth behind it." The rest of the interview went smoothly, but that one moment became the only part the media repeated. Sandra hesitates when asked about love. Keanu defends their bond. What are they hiding? By nightfall, the internet was filled with speculation again. Memes, headlines, endless analysis. Some called it beautiful, others called it staged. But for the two of them, it felt like a storm they hadn't meant to start. Sandra called him later that night. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "I didn't mean to make it worse." "You didn't," he said. "People will always see what they want to see." "Still," she whispered, "maybe we shouldn't have done it." Keanu sighed. "Maybe, but I don't regret it. Even with all this noise, especially with all this noise," he said gently, "because somewhere in all of it, I meant every word." She closed her eyes, her heart tightening. "You always say things that stay with me longer than they should. Maybe that's because they're true." There was a pause, the kind of silence that hums with everything unsaid. Finally, she whispered, "Keanu, what are we doing?" He didn't answer right away. Then, softly, he said, "We're doing what we've always done, trying to pretend it's just friendship when we both know it's not." The line went quiet after that. She didn't know what to say. Maybe it was easier not to say anything at all. For the next few days, they didn't speak. The distance grew quietly, not out of anger, but fear. The fear of what honesty might destroy. But fate doesn't wait for comfort. A week later, a charity event brought them face to face again. Unplanned, unexpected, and in front of cameras once more. As Sandra walked into the hall, their eyes met across the crowd. The noise faded, the lights dimmed, and for a brief second, it felt like time had stopped. She smiled faintly, the kind of smile that hides everything and reveals nothing. He nodded just once, as if to say, "I'm still here." But before they could talk, something happened that neither of them saw coming. A question shouted by a reporter, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Keanu, are you in love with Sandra Bullock?" He froze. Cameras flashed. Sandra turned slowly toward him, her heart racing, and the look in his eyes, the hesitation, the truth, the quiet ache, said more than any answer ever could. The confession that broke the silence, the flash of cameras was blinding, the noise deafening. Reporters called out his name again and again, their voices echoing across the hall. Sandra stood still, her hand frozen near her side, every heartbeat louder than the last. Keanu looked caught between truth and control, between what the world expected him to say and what his heart had been waiting to speak for years. The question still hung in the air. "Keanu, are you in love with Sandra Bullock?" It was the kind of question meant to stir chaos, not confession. But as the seconds passed, something shifted in his eyes. He wasn't running this time. He wasn't hiding. He took a small breath, lowered his gaze for a moment, and then looked up again. Not at the cameras, but at her. "I think love," he said quietly, "isn't something you can just switch off. Some people leave a part of themselves with you. Maybe that's what she did for me." The room fell silent. No one moved. Even the flashes seemed to pause. Sandra's breath caught in her throat. She knew Keanu well enough to understand. That wasn't a statement crafted for headlines. That was truth. The host on stage tried to recover the moment, awkwardly smiling. That's very touching, Keanu. A lot of admiration there, I'm sure. But admiration wasn't the word that fit. Everyone in the room felt it. The quiet power of something that had lived unspoken for too long. Sandra turned slightly, her eyes finding his. She didn't smile. She couldn't. The moment was too raw, too real. For the first time in years, she didn't know how to respond to him. When the event ended, she slipped away through a side corridor, her steps quick, her hands trembling slightly. She didn't stop until she reached the quiet parking lot behind the building. The air was cool, the city lights glimmering in the distance. A few minutes later, she heard footsteps behind her. She didn't need to turn around to know it was him. "You didn't have to say that," she said softly, facing the streetlights. "I know," he replied, "but I wanted to." She closed her eyes for a moment. "You've just given them another story to write." "Maybe," he said. "But I wasn't talking to them." She turned to face him then. His eyes were calm, steady, the same eyes that had always seen through her masks. "Then who were you talking to?" "You," he said simply. The word hung between them, small, honest, impossible to ignore. For a long moment, neither spoke. The sounds of the city faded into the distance. "Keanu," she whispered finally. "Why now? After all these years, why say this now?" "Because silence can only protect so much," he said. "And I'm tired of pretending I don't care the way I do." Sandra looked down, her hands tightening at her sides. "You don't understand," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "I've built my life around not needing anyone, around staying strong. If I let this in, I don't know what it will do to me." He stepped closer, his voice gentle. "It won't break you, Sandra." It never could. Love doesn't always have to be loud. Sometimes it's just being there when the world isn't kind. "That's all I've ever wanted to be for you." She shook her head slowly, tears gathering at the corners of her eyes. "You say that like it's easy." "It's not," he said quietly. "It's never been easy, but it's real." Her breath trembled. She wanted to step back, to hide behind her calm composure, but something in his voice kept her still. "You know what scares me?" she said softly. "That you might mean it. And that I might too." The honesty in her words felt like a storm breaking after years of quiet rain. He smiled faintly, his eyes warm. "Then maybe it's time we stop being afraid." She didn't answer. Instead, she looked away toward the lights of the city, blinking fast. Her heart felt too heavy, too full. After a long silence, she whispered, "You have no idea what the last few years have done to me. I've lost people, Keanu. I've lost myself sometimes. I don't know how to let anyone in without breaking again." He nodded slowly. "I know pain doesn't leave easily. I've carried my own. But sometimes two broken people can hold each other steady, even if just for a while." Her eyes lifted to his, searching for something. Maybe reassurance. Maybe forgiveness. Then, in a voice so soft it barely reached him, she said, "If I let you in, you can't walk away this time." He didn't hesitate. "I won't." And in that moment, something fragile began to shift between them. Not a confession born of impulse, but one built from years of shared silence and quiet care. But before the night could settle into peace, a voice broke through the air. A reporter's shout from across the parking lot. Cameras had followed them. The private conversation was no longer private. Flashes went off. Questions flew like arrows. "Are you two together? Was that a confession? Keanu, are you saying you love her?" Sandra's eyes widened. Keanu instinctively stepped between her and the crowd, his arm raised to shield her from the flashes. Security rushed in, guiding them quickly toward the exit. Sandra turned her face away, tears of frustration burning behind her eyes. This was supposed to be theirs, not the world's. When they finally reached his car, she exhaled shakily. "This is why I don't let anyone in," she said, her voice trembling. "Because the world won't let things stay real. They twist it, they take it apart." Keanu looked at her, his voice calm. "They can only twist what we let them. And what if I can't handle it?" She whispered. "Then I'll handle it for both of us," he said softly. They sat in silence for a while. the world outside blurring into distant noise. She looked out the window, her reflection faint in the glass. "I'm not sure I can go through this again," she said. "Not the way people did after my last heartbreak." "I barely survived it," he turned toward her. "Then don't think of it as going through something again. Think of it as finding peace again," she smiled sadly. "You make everything sound easy." "That's only because I've learned that life isn't," he said quietly. "And when you find something real, you don't let fear decide for you." She looked at him, her heart torn between belief and caution. She wanted to trust him. She always had. But her past had left marks that didn't fade easily. Finally, she said, "If I fall again, I need to know someone will catch me." Keanu reached out slowly, his hand brushing hers. "I've been here all along," he whispered. "You just stopped looking." Her fingers trembled slightly, but she didn't pull away. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The night outside was quiet, their silence filled with 1,000 unspoken words. Then, just when peace seemed possible, Sandra's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen. Dozens of missed calls, headlines already forming, gossip spreading faster than they could breathe. Her expression fell. "It's happening again," she said. "They're turning it into something ugly." Keanu looked at her, calm but firm. "Then let them. They don't get to define what's real." She shook her head, tears forming again. "But they do. They always do." And before he could say another word, she opened the door and stepped out into the night. He called her name softly, but she didn't turn back. The sound of her footsteps faded into the distance, leaving behind only the quiet hum of the city and the echo of everything they almost said. Keanu sat there for a long time, staring at the empty seat beside him. The confession had freed him, but it had also scared her. And in that fragile space between truth and fear, love once again found itself waiting, patient, wounded, but alive. As the night deepened, he whispered to himself, "I'll wait, even if it takes forever." The storm before the calm the next few days blurred into noise. News stations replayed the moment again and again, the question, his answer, the silence that followed. Every outlet had a version of the story. Some called it a love confession, others called it a publicity act. Interviews, talk shows, and headlines swarmed around their names like bees drawn to chaos. Sandra tried to block it out, but the world had a way of finding her. She turned off her phone, stayed off social media, and avoided calls from her team. The peace she had built over years was cracking again, piece by piece. One afternoon, she sat in her garden, staring at the still water of the small pond. The sky was overcast, heavy with the threat of rain. Her reflection in the water looked calm, but her heart was anything but. Her assistant, Claire, came to check on her. "People are asking for a response," Claire said gently. "They want to know what's true." Sandra didn't look up. "And if I stay silent, they'll decide for me." "Maybe," Claire said softly. "But if you speak, they'll twist your words anyway," Sandra sighed. "So either way, I lose." Claire hesitated, then asked, "Have you heard from him?" Sandra shook her head. "No, and that's probably for the best." But it wasn't what she felt. It was what she thought she needed to feel. What she didn't know was that Keanu had tried to call many times. He had left messages, each one softer than the last, each one filled with words he couldn't say in public. But her phone remained off, and the silence between them grew heavier with each passing day. Keanu spent his nights in his quiet apartment, sitting by the window, watching the rain trail down the glass. He had faced storms before, fame, loss, grief, but this storm felt different. It was personal. It was about something fragile and real, something he was terrified to lose. His friend, a film producer, called one evening. "Man, the whole world's talking about you and Sandra," he said. "It's everywhere. If you don't handle this, they'll bury it under rumors." Keanu sighed. "I don't care what they say about me. I just don't want them hurting her." "Then talk to her," his friend said, "before the silence turns into distance." Keanu nodded, though the call ended with more uncertainty than comfort. He knew he had to see her. Not for the cameras, not for the stories, but for the truth between them. 2 nights later, he drove to her home. The road was quiet, the air heavy with mist. As he parked outside her gate, he hesitated. Maybe she wouldn't want to see him. Maybe showing up would only make things harder. But he couldn't turn back now. He pressed the intercom button. No response. He waited, pressed it again. After a long moment, her voice came through, soft, tired, guarded. "Who is it?" "It's me," he said quietly. There was silence on the other end. Then, "Why are you here, Keanu?" "Because silence isn't helping either of us." A pause. "You should go." "I can't," he said. "Not until you hear me out." Another silence. Then the gate opened slowly. He walked up the path, his footsteps echoing softly against the stone. She was standing by the door, arms folded, eyes unreadable. "You shouldn't have come," she said quietly. "Maybe," he said, "but I needed to." She turned away, stepping inside. "You don't understand what this has done, Keanu. The calls, the messages, the stories. They're saying things I never wanted said." "I know," he said gently. "And I'm sorry." "Sorry doesn't fix it," she said, her voice trembling. "I spent years learning how to be okay on my own. And in one night, you pulled me back into the noise I tried so hard to escape." He stepped closer, his voice calm but firm. "I didn't pull you back. I reminded you that you were never meant to disappear." She turned to him, eyes shining with frustration. "You think love fixes things, Keanu? It doesn't. It complicates everything." "Maybe it does," he said. "But it also gives things meaning. All this noise, it only matters because something real exists beneath it." She shook her head, tears starting to form. "You don't know what it's like to be watched for every smile, every touch." "I can't live like that again." He looked at her quietly. "Then let's live quietly. Away from it all. We don't owe anyone anything." Her breath caught. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that a world outside of cameras and rumors could still hold peace for them. But she whispered, "It's not that easy." "Nothing worth it ever is," he said softly. For a moment, silence filled the room. The kind of silence that holds everything, pain, hope, and fear all at once. Then suddenly, she stepped forward, her voice breaking. "You're making me feel again, Keanu, and I don't know if I can handle it." He reached out slowly, his hand brushing hers. "Then let me handle it with you." Her eyes closed, tears slipping down her cheeks. "Why do you always say the right thing when I least want to hear it?" He smiled faintly. "Because it's the only time you listen." She laughed softly through her tears, shaking her head. "You haven't changed." "Neither have you," he said. "You still run when something feels too real." Her laughter faded. She looked at him for a long time, searching, remembering, fighting against her own heart. Finally, she whispered, "What if it doesn't work?" "What if we ruin what we have?" He smiled sadly. "Then at least we'll ruin it honestly." She stood there, silent, her mind spinning, her heart trembling. Then, almost without realizing, she stepped closer. Her hand rested against his chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. "You never stopped caring, did you?" she whispered. "No," he said. "And I never will." Her eyes softened. "And what if I'm still too scared?" "Then I'll wait," he said simply. "I'll wait until you're not." The rain began again, soft at first, then heavier, tapping against the windows. She leaned her forehead against his chest, tears mixing with the sound of rain. He wrapped his arms around her, holding her as if the world outside had ceased to exist. It wasn't a grand confession. It wasn't perfect. It was real, two broken hearts finding a quiet rhythm in the middle of chaos. They stood there for what felt like hours. No cameras, no questions, no noise. Just silence, rain, and the sound of something healing. But as the night deepened, Sandra pulled away slightly. "I don't want to lose myself again," she said softly. He nodded. "Then don't. Just be who you are." "I'll meet you there," she smiled faintly, her eyes still damp. "You make it sound simple." "Because love isn't about fixing," he said. "It's about standing beside someone while they heal." For the first time in a long time, she believed him. But the peace they found that night wouldn't last long. The world outside was still watching. and someone had already seen what happened through the window. A photo would surface the next morning, grainy but clear enough. Keanu holding her close, her head resting against his chest. It would be the photo that changed everything again. Love in the open light, the morning arrived with no warning. A quiet dawn broke over Los Angeles, but for Sandra, the peace didn't last long. The first call came from her publicist, then her assistant, then the studio. Each voice carried the same panic. "It's everywhere, Sandra. Someone took a picture through your window. It's on every site." She didn't need to look. She already knew which picture they were talking about. The one moment that had felt private, sacred. She had rested her head against his chest for only a second, just long enough to breathe again, and now the whole world was staring at it. She sat on the edge of her bed, the phone still pressed against her ear. "What are they saying?" she asked quietly. "Everything," Claire said. "That you're together, that it's a publicity stunt, that it's a secret relationship. It's all over the news." Sandra exhaled slowly. "Of course it is. They're asking for a statement." "What should I tell them?" Sandra hesitated. She wanted to hide, to disappear until the noise faded. But she knew better. Silence only fed the fire. And yet the thought of turning something so pure into headlines broke her heart. "Tell them nothing," she said finally. "Not yet." After hanging up, she walked to the window. Outside, the sun was rising, soft gold spilling across the city. She wondered if he'd seen the picture too. And miles away, in a quiet apartment filled with early light, Keanu sat at his kitchen table, the same picture glowing on his phone. He didn't feel anger or regret, just sadness, not because of what had happened, but because the world had once again stolen something fragile from them. His phone buzzed, messages from his team, reporters, friends. But he ignored them all. Instead, he typed one message and sent it. "Don't hide today. Let them see that love doesn't have to be ashamed." When Sandra read it, her heart ached. She stared at the words for a long time. Part of her wanted to run again, but part of her knew he was right. Love, if it was real, couldn't live in shadows forever. Later that day, Sandra's car pulled up outside a quiet cafe downtown. The same one by the lake where they had met weeks ago. This time, reporters were already nearby, their lenses waiting. As she stepped out, flashes began. People shouted her name, asking questions she didn't answer. She walked calmly, every step measured until she saw him waiting inside. Keanu stood when she entered, that same calm smile on his face. Steady, kind, patient. She sat across from him, the noise outside muffled by the glass walls. "You saw it," she said softly. He nodded. "I did. And you're still here. Where else would I be?" She smiled faintly, though her eyes were tired. "You always make it sound so simple." "Because it is," he said quietly. "We didn't do anything wrong. We cared. We're human. That's all." She looked at him for a long moment. "You know what the world does with love stories like ours?" she asked. "They tear them apart before they even have a chance to breathe. Then we protect it," he said. "Not by hiding it, but by standing in it." She hesitated. "And if it all falls apart? Then at least we didn't spend our lives pretending it didn't matter." His words sank deep, cutting through her fear. She had lived so long behind walls, walls built from heartbreak, loss, and the need to stay composed. But in front of him, every wall felt useless. Finally, she whispered, "I don't know how to do this anymore, Keanu." "Then let me show you," he said softly. They talked for hours that morning, about everything the years had taken and everything they still hoped to find. There was laughter, a few tears, and the quiet realization that love, when it's real, doesn't demand perfection. It just asks for honesty. As they left the cafe, the cameras waited. Flashes erupted again. Someone shouted, "Are you two together?" Sandra froze for a moment, her instinct screaming to stay silent. But then she felt his hand reach for hers. It was a simple gesture, quiet but certain. She looked up at him and he gave her a small nod, the kind that said, "It's okay." And for the first time in years, she didn't hide. She intertwined her fingers with his and turned toward the cameras, her expression calm, almost serene. We're just two people, she said softly, her voice steady despite the noise. And sometimes two people find each other again. The words were quiet, but they spread fast, across headlines, across hearts. The story the world thought it already knew changed that day. It was no longer about rumors or secrets. It was about something real, something that refused to stay in the shadows. Later that night, Sandra sat on her balcony, the city glowing below. Keanu was there beside her, quiet, his guitar resting on his knee. He strummed softly, each note floating into the air like a memory. "You know," she said, smiling faintly, "I thought I was done with believing in happy endings." He looked at her gently. "Maybe this isn't an ending. Maybe it's just peace." She leaned her head on his shoulder, the world far below them. "Peace sounds nice," she whispered. "It's all I ever wanted for you," he said. The wind was soft that night, carrying the scent of rain and jasmine. For once, there were no questions left to answer. No rumors, no fear. Just two souls who had found their way back to each other, slowly, painfully, beautifully. As the night deepened, Sandra closed her eyes. "You know," she said quietly, "when you spoke about me that night, when you said I taught you grace, you forgot to mention something." He smiled. "What's that?" "That you taught me how to trust again." He turned to her, his eyes warm, full of quiet love. "Then maybe we both learned something after all." And under the soft glow of city lights, their hands found each other again, not in secrecy, not in fear, but in peace. The world would keep talking, as it always does. But for them, none of it mattered anymore. Because in the end, love doesn't need applause. It just needs to be real.